Hi, I'm Carlin Borisenko. In early 2020, I was the knitting Democrat who accidentally went viral on the internet for going to a Trump rally and then left the party. I became the conservative darling, was on all the shows, traveled around the country, and then realized that conservatives were no better than Democrats. If there's one thing that I've learned, it's that both political tribes are two sides of the same coin. But it wasn't all bad. On my journey, I became obsessed with understanding the woke ideology and the culture war. I broke the story of the city of Seattle doing segregated training with its employees.
How bad has this stuff become? The city of Seattle has now put out, I'm not kidding you, this is according to Dr. Carolyn Borisenko, who's an organizational psychologist. The city of Seattle asked its white employees to voluntarily spend a day off in a training about their internalized racial superiority.
I broke the story that led to the first ever federal lawsuit against critical race theory in the schools. I broke the Coke Be Less White story, one of the biggest anti-woke stories of all time. It got over 30 million views. Coca-Cola's corporate headquarters even had to change their outgoing voicemail.
Throughout the past few days, you may have seen inaccurate reporting on the content of our recently launched diversity, equity, and inclusion training program.
I exposed the schools in Burlington, Vermont for grooming middle school children live on the internet. They called me an unwoke cult leader for that. And the Vermont Human Rights Commission slandered me publicly as being a hate channel. I even got called a hero in Breitbart for exposing that the Washington Post was writing a hit piece on Christopher Rufo. I have broken story after story after story about what's going on in the public schools, from Cambridge, Massachusetts, to autistic sex education, to the Department of Education in Michigan, literally training teachers all over the state how to groom children. I wrote a book called Actively Unwoke, the ultimate guide for fighting back against the woke insanity in your life. I host a podcast all about fighting back, and I'm downloading all of my knowledge to you on my Substack, carlin.substack.com. The world is a crazy place. We are literally surrounded by cults on all sides. On this show, we're going to do a deep dive into all aspects of the culture war, and I will show you the dark, dystopian underbellies on both sides. Here are the commitments I'll make to you. I will always tell you the truth. I will always bring you receipts. And if you stick with me, I promise you will see the world differently. Welcome to the cult. Please mount that like button for me and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Well, happy Monday, everyone. Happy almost 4th of July. We're almost there. And I'm actually really excited about the stream we're going to be doing today because we're going to take a little bit more of a laid back stream today. You know, we tend to cover a lot of heavy topics on the show and, you know, looking at the crazy stuff that's going on the left, even looking at the crazy stuff that's going on the right. And today I just hope we can have a nice, chill conversation with Joseph Cotto. He's been on the channel many times before. He is one of the channel favorites for sure because he's just so even-keeled and so smart, and I just love his analysis. And the reason that I'm especially excited to have Joseph on today is, you guys know I'm a little bit of a nerd about royal things. I love like the studying the royal family. Many of the royal families, but obviously the one in England is the most famous. And Joseph actually has a new book out that is just like hits on so many things I'm interested in. He's got a book called Follow the Leader: What the Business World Can Learn from How Queen Elizabeth Managed and Served Others. What a great topic, so relevant. I think there's so much that we can learn from Queen Elizabeth, not just in terms of just like, and I'm going to be interested in what Joseph has to say about this too, I guess in terms of her restraint. I would guess would be something that I would learn from her discipline. Like the royal family, is my perception of it, is that it's run in an extremely predictable kind of regimented way. And even when it feels like things are kind of going off the rails, they stick to what works, you know, never complain, never explain sort of thing. And I love it. There is a dignity about that type of leadership style that I don't think we see much today, and God knows I would find it near impossible to engage in because I'm way too fiery for that. But I'm looking forward to hearing from Joseph on that. Before I bring him on, I just want to say that I want to remind everyone to make sure you are subscribed to my Substack, which is Carlin, Substack.com. I cannot tell you guys how many things I have to write this week. If you are a subscriber to my Substack, like, prepare to be inundated with emails. I promise I will make every one of them relevant. I will make every one of them great. There are just so many great stories that are out right now that I've wanted to give coverage to, and so sometimes you're going to get some more stories than others, but there's going to be a lot of coverage going up this week. I hope you guys will subscribe. You can all subscribe for free and get access to all of my free content, but I do have premium content behind the paywall as well. And of course, if you do want to support the work I'm doing and keep me in business, because I am 100% funded by you, you can sign up for a membership for $5 a month or for $50 a year. I do want to let everyone know that this month is going to, I cannot believe we're in July already. Like, that's crazy to me. But this month is going to be a great month to sign up on the Substack for a paid membership, because at the end of July, the membership levels are going up to $8 a month or $80 a year. The reason I made that decision is that it's actually more in line with where people are, with what people are charging on Substack that have my subscriber numbers. And so we're going to boost up the numbers. But if you sign up as a paid subscriber before the end of the month, you do actually get grandfathered in. So you never have to pay the $8 a month or $80 a year, and you get it for a little bit less, which I think is pretty cool. And a nice little incentive, because there are some things that I want to do later this month that require a little bit of fundraising. And the Substack is where I get the funds from. So if you want to do that, you can head over there and sign up for that, and I would greatly appreciate it. All right, let's bring on our guest for today. Now, Dr. Joseph Ford Cotto, which I know is really exciting, because I know how hard getting a PhD is. Dr. Joseph Ford Cotto is the first Bearing Cotto, a former nationally syndicated newspaper columnist. Cotto is also the editor of a book review. In addition to being a nonfiction author, he is the host of a great show that he's doing on his Twitter. I would encourage everyone to follow him. I just find him insightful in so many different areas, and his doctorate is in business administration. So very relevant to the chat we're going to have today about his book. And yeah, here we go. Welcome, Joseph, to the channel. Welcome.
Very glad to be here. Thank you for having me on, Carla.
Yeah, as always. And I'm just so excited about your new book. So, like, tell me a little bit about, why did you decide to write about the leadership style of Queen Elizabeth?
Well, it was something that I thought was not very well understood as it related to workforce management. People might think about her leadership style when it comes to being the head of state of many different countries, which she obviously was. But she also was somebody who ran what was effectively a business, even though it's not organized as such under the laws of the UK, the royal households of the United Kingdom. And she was able to manage her workforce in such a way that people stayed on much longer than would be the average for Americans at whatever their place of employment is. And these people stayed on even though they made not a great deal of money by the standards of the UK or the US. And some people even stayed with Elizabeth for as long as 6 decades.
Oh, that's so crazy.
It is. It's amazing. So she was able to really have this way of leading people that a lot of folks found very endearing. And I think it's something that people can learn from in the business world today, particularly in the US, where there are all these issues with turnover and people not feeling loyal to their employer, even if they're not, leaving. And then the employer doesn't feel the employees are doing a good enough job. And so the cycle goes. So I thought that the book was pretty relevant to a lot of stuff going on now. I will say that it essentially is my doctoral dissertation. I got a doctorate in business administration, technically a little different from a PhD, but it's
just as much work. It's just a different type of work,
Exactly. Yeah, they're both nowadays ranked about the same, even though some people would say the PhD is better. It's a little bit of outdated thinking, whatever. But the thing of it is, when it comes to Elizabeth, she's someone who is, like I said, very well understood in certain ways, but not well understood in others. And I hope that the book would shine a light on some of her accomplishments that the business world could learn from, because heaven knows it could use a bit of improvement.
I mean, I heard stories about people that worked for her, like the woman that was like her dresser, where she would take really good care of them, make sure that they had, really nice like accommodations to live in, like on palace grounds and stuff like that. And then also like the staff that worked for her seemed so loyal to her. Like I once read a story that her dresser would actually like walk around. They had the same size shoes, and so she would walk around in her new shoes to like break them in, so that once Elizabeth got them, they were all like worn and stuff. And it's like stuff like that. It's just it's those little things that you only think of when you are truly loyal to someone and you want to serve someone. And it strikes me that she dedicated her life to service. I mean, it is incredible when you think about that speech she made, when what she was like very very young, saying, I'm dedicating my life to serving my people, and then was on the throne for 70 years. I mean, I can't imagine getting thrown into something like that, but she did see her role as an act of service, and I think that that probably came through in her leadership style as well. Am I wrong?
Not wrong at all. She devoted her life to public service and also serving people in a more, you could say, intimate role, such as those who work for her in the royal households. And her mindset was definitely that she would give what she had to the public, and she hoped that the public would reciprocate by being loyal to the crown, or in the case of the royal households, being loyal to the employer. So it was a really interesting dynamic that she established, and one that obviously served her very well throughout her generations, let alone decades of time on the throne. And she did make that speech you referenced when she was in her 20s, and she reigned until she was in her 90s. So it goes to show how enduring her leadership was. But if you look at how people wanted to stay with her as an employer, even though they weren't making the greatest deal of money, it goes to show how effective she was as a boss, a supervisor.
So what made her so effective? Why were people so loyal to her?
Well, you can say she was loyal to them. She also was somebody who took great care to acknowledge people who were serving her as an employer. She made sure that they knew that they were valued. They even have a medal that's given, a distinguished service medal, to people who perform well within the royal households. And she was very accommodating toward people when they had certain family issues, this, that, the other thing. People who work for the royal households generally believed that their work was meaningful, even if they were doing something that was thought of as menial. It was given a sort of elevated status that you would not find anywhere else, even at a prestigious, Fortune 500 multinational. So Elizabeth was able to sort of make the ordinary extraordinary. And that compensated for the lack of compensation, at least financial compensation, which people who worked for her received.
I mean, they do get some to live in some like pretty prime real estate in those apartments in London, though. So you got to take that into consideration as well.
Oh yeah, people who would work with her day in day out. I mean, obviously the jobs of the royal households are all day in day out, but people
Mhm.
who receive lodging for their work definitely get to live in an outstanding place. And those who don't get to work in an outstanding place with employers who they know are going to treat them in a humane fashion. So that counts. It really does. People who work for the royal households were not afraid of being backstabbed by their boss or having their job offshored or anything like that. And the peace of mind which that created went a long way.
I mean, it really is incredible because they employ, how many people do they employ?
I don't know how many they employ right now, but they during Elizabeth's time they employed several hundred.
That's, I mean, like, and to have several hundred people where you're in a situation where they're, I mean, they leaked to the press, but when they leaked to the press, it was like controlled leaks, like they was a purposeful leak. They wasn't just like people complaining to the press all the way up until we get to Harry and Meghan, and then people started leaking to the press, complaining a little bit about what was going on, because it was basically the opposite of, I think, what they received from the Queen, and so that caused some problems. But it really is impressive that you have several hundred people who are, doing all sorts of different types of tasks. They have access to the information that everyone in the world wants about the inner workings of the royal family and the gossip and all of this stuff, and just everyone keeps their mouth shut. And I think that that level of loyalty is something that, I mean, I can't think of an organization in the United States that has that many employees that have that level of loyalty, where there's that much media interest in what's going on and just no one talks. I mean, can you think of something comparable in the United States that might be that?
No, not at all. That's because people don't have the sort of loyalty to their employer here that folks who work for the royal households have to the monarch. There's nothing comparable in the slightest. It's amazing how you can have an institution like the royal households that made it into the current era, and yet there is such a degree of loyalty inspired among people who work there. Even though, like I said, they don't earn the highest salaries. That is, as you said, they wouldn't be leaking stuff that's potentially embarrassing or unambiguously embarrassing. It's really amazing. It is, and it's a true credit to Elizabeth that she was able to cultivate a workforce which performs in this way.
Are there any sort of stories that stick out to you as you did your research into this that would like encapsulate what her leadership style was?
She was someone who made it a point to let people know that they were accepted is one way of describing it, to let them know really that their contributions were valued. She treated people in a very humane way, and people who worked with her very closely. I'm thinking of one of her closest aides. This is a woman who was with her for over 60 years. The relationship they had, you couldn't really call it sister like because there always obviously is a hierarchy, but it was very close, such as that the lady who was working for the Queen was treated basically as one of the Queen's close friends or relatives. And this lady, like I said, had been the Queen's loyal aide by the since the early 1960s. So it's really interesting to see how Elizabeth was able to, despite having this high position, be very humane with people who were serving her, people who were, functioning as workers, but at the same time, even though they were unambiguously workers, they were dealt with as contributors to something larger than themselves, and that certainly made these people feel that what they were doing was worthwhile. So yeah, Elizabeth's relationship with one of her close aides comes to mind. The level of care and devotion they had to each other's well-being was exceptional, and it's something you don't really see today in the business world, to say the least.
Hmm. How do you think her relationship with Prince Philip played into this? Because it's kind of like my perception that I mean, his role was to support her, and I feel like they were a nice balance to each other, and I feel like that has to show up in your relationship with your staff.
There's no indication that they had any sort of negative relationship.
Hmm.
Everything was harmonious insofar as any account of what happened goes. And I think that Elizabeth and Phil complemented each other quite well, which did create a harmonious situation, as you mentioned. Certainly, the staff was able to function as well as they did because the family dynamic among the Windsors, for any issues it might have had, insofar as the staff were concerned, it went very smoothly. And that basically was the case until Harry and Meghan, as you also mentioned. So it's something else that Elizabeth was able to manage these folks as she did, but it's also, you to factor in the marriage she had and the influence it had on her, and people were working very close to her. And obviously, if she and Philip were in a bad situation, then things would not have been running so smoothly. But they clearly did have a very productive union, and that caused, well, it allowed for, I'll say, a very stable, appreciable situation among those who work for the royal households.
Hmm. So it strikes me that I'm like I said in the intro, I'm a nerd about all this royal stuff. Like I devour every episode of The Crown, even though I know it's fictional. Okay, I understand, but it's still great. Like I've like read the books that like The Crown was based on, like all this stuff. And so one of the things that's like striking to me is that she got thrown into the role of queen. First of all, she never expected to be queen growing up. That was something that happened because of the abdication, but then her father died so young, and she was so young when she became the monarch. And it's almost one of those things where I suspect that like she had to be, correct me if I'm wrong, she had to be kind of handled and managed by the people that were running the royal household at first, probably because she was so young. She, like, her father hadn't really, trained her. I get like trained as much as like Charles has had training and apprenticeship and all that stuff. And it's just like, so I guess she kind of like, my perception is she grew into the role. And maybe there was some point in which she kind of like started, I don't know how to phrase this exactly, kind of started kind of like coming into her own as the leader of the household after maybe being managed and handled by the courtiers for a while. Does that make any sense at all? Am I off
Sure, it
track?
does. Oh, no, no, no. What happened was really foundational in terms of her leadership as she grew older was World War II, because she did enlist in the military and she served the equivalent rank of a captain, and she actually was a mechanic. And that was something in and of itself, but also her family refused to flee the United Kingdom during the
Mm,
Blitzkrieg. So she lived in constant fear of dying. But her family had the belief that they were meant to die, and they were meant to die. They said it would have been God's will. And this made Elizabeth, I think, although there's no question about it, it made her have a perspective that things were beyond her control, but other things were within her realm of control. And she would balance between what she could be controlled and what could not be controlled. And she would hone in on controlling what she could in a productive way, not in this sort of, micromanaging, shrew-like fashion. And that allowed her to have a unique style of leadership as she grew older. She would definitely try to make it so things that she wanted came to pass, but she recognized that certain things, no matter what she wanted, were not going to happen. And so there was a balance there, no question about it. But World War II was the transformational period in her young life, where she went from being, the daughter of a man who never thought he'd be king to most certainly someone who is ready to take on the role of head of multiple states.
hmm. What do you think she learned from her experience in the military that then made its way into her leadership style later in life?
Camaraderie, number one, the necessity of getting along with people. Number two, realizing that even if one has a great rank socially in terms of the aristocracy, at the end of the day, there are situations where you're part of a unit and you have to be like anyone else. She was, I mean, like I said, she was a mechanic, and it was interesting that she was put into this situation for a host of reasons. Number one, how young she was. Number two, that she was a woman, and at that time, it was not common, for women to do what she was doing, especially in terms of being a mechanic or a captain in the military. But she definitely was someone who got a front row seat to history, you could say. And she was made in a way, not egalitarian in the modern political sense, but she definitely wound up having a sort of egalitarian mindset about the importance of people in an ecosystem, if you will. And she saw herself as part of an ecosystem rather than the perpetual star of the show.
And so, okay, so we have to touch on the Harry and Meghan stuff if we're gonna have this conversation. Like, because that just kind of like threw a wrench into everything, right? I mean, it seemed to me like everything was going on pretty smoothly. They have their never complain, never explain attitude, like things are just going along. And then all of a sudden, you've got Harry and Meghan coming in and doing this dramatic exit from the royal family, and and they say it's something that they were trying to negotiate for a really long time and the family wasn't budging and stuff like that, but that was a pretty big like shocker, I think, for a lot of people. And I guess I have a couple of questions. How do you think she handled that? And I guess do you think she would have handled that differently had it been earlier in her life, or do you think there's like do you have any critique about how that was handled, I guess?
She would have not allowed it to happen if it were earlier in her life, and it never would have been
Mhm.
something that was feasible for a host of reasons. But by the 2010s, particularly after the previous decade where Charles had married Camilla, it was thought of as something I wouldn't quite say more. I wouldn't say ideal, but acceptable, something that could be dealt with. The thing of it is, Megan didn't take very well to the expectations of someone who was part of the royal family from the beginning. She very much wanted to do her own thing, to be outspoken about certain issues, to have the spotlight be on her. And obviously, that did not gel well with how the royal family functions. None of it did. That was definitely a clash. I did see the wedding of Harry and Meghan, And it was pretty clear, from the Queen's reaction to it, that she wasn't the happiest. She definitely looked to be more pleased when William got married,
Mhm.
but it's something that she had to put up with. And I think it was very clear that if the royal family tried to scupper the relationship, Markle would have did what she ultimately did, claim that there was some sort of race-based thing going on. So I think the Royals handled it as well as they could have. It was a very uncomfortable, undignified situation that was thrown upon them, but it was something they had to put up with, and they had to put up with it using great finesse, or else any little thing they did would be exploited by Meghan, which ultimately happened. I'm sure they
Yeah.
probably foresaw it would happen eventually, but they didn't want to hasten the inevitable. But yeah, I can't complain about how they handled the situation with her, because it was always going to be a very difficult situation that was designed to make them look bad.
I mean, it's one of those things that I think it actually shows the effectiveness of how Elizabeth ran that household, though, because even though, she's no longer with us now, you can kind of see how, Harry and Meghan had people on their side for a while, but the royal family just kind of stayed out of it. They stayed above it. They kept going about their business. They didn't offer any explanation. They had that one statement after the Oprah interview where, and I think it recently came out that the Princess of Wales, Catherine, was the one who got this statement inserted into the statement, which is recollections may vary, which I just thought was like the most brilliant way to handle it. And it's like you kind of see this arc of the implications of the leadership style of just being like rising above, going about your business, not getting pulled down into the fray, because now we're seeing that the public has completely turned against Harry and Meghan, and I think it's partially because the royal family has just tried to take the high road and keep their head out of it. I mean, do you think the same thing, or?
Absolutely no. It shows that they're focused on the long run, which Elizabeth was in her workforce managerial strategy as
Mhm.
well. So it's an overarching theme with the Royals that they're focused on the long game. But Harry obviously was not, and Meghan certainly wasn't. It was about instant gratification, fame, and you even see that now with them not being able to fulfill their contract with Netflix and Spotify, where they get into this really lucrative arrangement that, quite frankly, was weighted absurdly in their favor, but they're unable to complete their end of the deal, and it's because obviously they're not focused on the long run. It's very impulsive, very short term, and that sort of thing just isn't going to work with any matter that relates to any royal family if the royal family wants to survive on the throne.
Mhm. One of the things that I like about the monarchy in general, and I think this is, it's an interesting thing because, like, as an American, I'm not supposed to like support a monarchy, right? But I actually think there are a lot of strengths to having a monarchy, and one of those strengths, of course, is that. Like, so during the trucker strike last year or whenever that was, in Canada, what I found out was that Trudeau could not use the military in the trucker strike because it had to be approved by the Queen. And the queen wasn't going to approve that because she was never going to approve the military being used on her own people. And so that's one of like the strengths of the monarchy, whereas she is completely neutral in terms of like being a head of state. But the one thing that she does have control over is using the military. And if she doesn't give the approval, the military doesn't get used. And so I think that sort of thing is very powerful. But I also think, I listen to there's this commentator on YouTube that I loved named River. He's like a royal gossip channel, but he's very intelligent about how he talks about the monarchy, and he talks about the soft power of influence and the fact that Elizabeth had these relationships with every single world leader, and that everyone had great affection for her because of how she carried herself and how she managed the role. And so it's one of those things where you have this soft power of influence that can be used when you do need something, or God forbid, if you do enter a situation where you might be going into a war. Well, if a leader of a foreign power really likes the queen, they're going to be much less inclined to get into a war with England over that. And so, I mean, do you see benefits to a monarchy that maybe people like us could benefit from in America?
Oh, absolutely. No, I am a constitutional monarchist. I've been one since I was a boy. I actually referenced that at the end of the book. But no, the monarchy, I think, is vastly superior to the Republican form of government on general principle. Now, there are situations where a republic functions very well, such as in Switzerland or in Uruguay or San Marino. But you're talking about smaller countries that, in the case of Uruguay or San Marino, are homogenous, or Switzerland, where there is this cantonal system where different cultures basically have their own, in American parlance, state, and the federal government is much, much weaker in Switzerland than it is in the US. So, no, monarchy is much more stable. It allows for much more effectively decentralized government. The parliamentary system, I think, is more efficient in representing the will of the people. I very much like the old crown colonial system. I think it's a good hybrid of some form of centralized control to prevent like a Pol Pot from coming about, but also decentralization, which allows for people to have control over their own destiny as being as it goes to have their will represented in parliament or the legislature of their colony. So it's a wonderful system, constitutional monarchy. I think the best governing system which has ever been devised, and I am a big advocate of it.
I mean, I think another advantage of it too, and this was not so much the case with Elizabeth, but when we look at Charles, Charles had 70 years to
Mhm.
learn how to be king, right? I mean, he like decades of being mentored and, being like an apprentice sort of thing. And everyone was so skeptical about Charles because he would be very outspoken on certain issues and had some crazy ideas that people weren't
Mhm.
really in favor of. And I think, for a while, everyone kind of, well, I won't say everyone, but many people thought that as soon as Elizabeth died, that was going to kind of be the end of the monarchy because Charles was going to mess it up in some way. But it seems to me like I think that Charles has actually learned I mean, quite obviously learned a lot from being with his mother and kind of like apprenticing her all of those years. And I think he's doing a great job. I mean, how would you compare Charles so far to Elizabeth?
Well, of course, there's only one Elizabeth, but Charles has not done a bad job. He's done, I didn't think he would do that badly, by the way, because I figured he would learn from his mother and he would know what to do and when to do it, what to say, when to say it, how to act at all times. And he's not disappointed. I think he's done a very decent job. And I have obviously researched his opinions about various issues, and he's sort of all over the place, which is what I would expect for someone who does come from a monarchical background because they see themselves as being above and beyond left and right, conservative and labor. So it's really interesting to see how he functions. And I am pleasantly surprised. Now, I wouldn't say surprised because, like I said, I thought he was doing a good job. But it's pleasant to see how well he has done and how he's managed things. It's just really something else. Of course, like I mentioned, there is only one Elizabeth. I don't know that he would ever engender the sort of loyalty that she did, but he is doing quite well, and I'm very relieved by that.
I mean, I thought it was really moving, honestly, to see the outpouring of support for Elizabeth when she died and just that queue that was just like miles, miles back for people to just have a moment to, pay their respects, like David Beckham waiting in line for 13 hours and all of this stuff. And like on the same token, like I was really moved. I did a whole coronation mega marathon when Charles was coronated because I we started by watching Elizabeth's father's coronation, and then we watched Elizabeth's coronation, and then that led us right into Charles's, and so we were up all night watching coronations. And I just thought it was like it's so incredibly moving to see an institution that has been alive for 1,000 years with roughly kind of like the same rituals. I mean, there have been changes here and there, but there is 1,000 years of precedence, and I think that there's something very humbling and very moving about just the whole institution of the monarchy. Would you agree?
100%. It always lets people know that no matter how powerful they are at present, they are part of something larger than themselves. And while they have their time in the present, it comes and goes. So this, I think, creates a sort of humbling effect. That's a good way of putting it. But it makes people realize that they're not the biggest thing, and that's very, very important for controlling the inevitable ego of holding such a high office. And in something like the U.S., there's no equivalent. The president basically has the combined authority of a prime minister and a strong monarch. Not even, you can say theoretically constitutional one, but in America, the Constitution is interpreted in so many different ways that a lot of times presidents are able to do whatever the hell they want. It's really interesting how the presidential system functions in relation to Britain's constitutional monarchy. I personally would like the monarch to have a bit more power than he or she does in the UK, but I think the constitutional system is essential. And I do think that the UK should have a written constitution. But then again, in the US, we have a written constitution that's constantly reinterpreted. And what it amounts to on any given day really boils down to the politics of the judges who are appointed to interpret it. So, it's unfortunate. The judges appointed by partisan politicians, obviously, and voted on by partisan politicians. So it's really it's something to compare the U.S. and the U.K.
Well, and I definitely want to talk about our current interpretation of the Constitution in a second when we switch gears and focus on some current events. But the last thing I want to ask about Elizabeth is, I again, like I have all this stuff on my Instagram where I basically have, like, if you log into my Instagram, it's like royal historical videos, and that's basically all I see. And one of the types of videos that I always see are like Elizabeth was funny and she loved kind of like cracking people up. And like one of the things I love to watch is there are all these videos of her cutting different cakes with different swords and different knives and just being like very playful about it. Like she wanted to like people to laugh and to smile and to be like, and she was a little bit silly to like evoke that. Like was her sense of humor part of her leadership style, do you think?
Absolutely. The goal was to make people feel at ease and to make them feel that they weren't being looked down upon, which in turn did not build a sense of anger in them toward Elizabeth and the monarchy on the whole. So, yes, her sense of humor was essential in not only dealing with people across the world at official events or even in private, but also dealing with her workforce. She was a serious leader, but they did know that she had a lighthearted side and that she was not someone who would deal with them in a malicious fashion. And the humor she used was a way of communicating that she was not out basically to destroy anyone's life.
hmm And I think I think we saw that with Charles too. Like I think what it really is. I mean, you said it so beautifully. Is like she wanted to make people feel comfortable,
Mhm.
right? And I think that
Absolutely.
truly great leaders, they do have a way of just like making people feel comfortable, making people feel welcome. And when people feel comfortable and welcome, they're more likely to kind of show up and to really like do their best work. And I remember, the right after Elizabeth died, Charles had his kind of like first meeting with the prime minister, and you could see all over his and Camilla's faces. They were like, I think probably in shock for the first, week or so after
Mhm.
Elizabeth died, as I think anyone would. I mean, can you imagine losing
Sure.
not only losing your mother, but also doing it on the world stage where you have to are all of a sudden king, have to do all I think anyone can relate to that might be difficult. But I remember this moment when he welcomed the prime minister in for their first meeting, and it was just like he was
Mhm.
gracious and it was like magnanimous and it was like you like he it was just like it was almost like he was taking care of her, and I can't imagine that didn't come from what his mother taught him.
Oh, no question. Obviously, he did learn from her over the span of generations, and how he deals with people such as the prime minister, and how he'll deal with many more people as the years pass. It does stem from how he was trained. He is a
Mhm.
product. Well, I mean, as with all of us, a product of nature and nurture. But what he learned from his environment made him what you see, and that's a very good thing because one bad monarch can result in the monarchy being toppled.
Absolutely. All right, I do have one more question about this. I
Sure.
lied. It just popped into my head, but it's kind of a fun question. Okay. So you're like imagine that you are King Charles and you have this rapscallion son gallivanting around with this Hollywood actress in the United States and they're causing all sorts of havoc. How would you handle the situation with Harry and Meghan if you were Charles right now? I mean, I think he's done a pretty decent job, but what advice would you give him?
I would say to ignore them as much as possible.
Mhm.
Because anything he says about them in public, or anything he would say to them in private that they could get documented and used against him, it's just going to play into their narrative. They are very much creatures of 21st century celebrity culture, and that means that they will not play by the rules of honor and integrity that the royals are used to. It's very cutthroat with Meghan and Harry, even though they promote themselves as being these great humanitarians who are concerned with fashionable causes, blah, blah, blah. Those are people you really can't win with. So I would tell Charles to ignore them. Although if they said something really, really crazy about him, he would have no choice but to issue a declarative statement. But only then would it be appropriate to engage them. I would say it's best to try to minimize them and to make them seem irrelevant. Just go on doing your job to the best of your abilities and have members of your family do the same thing. But when it comes to Harry and Meghan, I mean, those are people who are manipulators. And it's unfortunate because Harry wasn't raised to be that, but obviously he chose that lifestyle for himself. And he is what he is now. So he can't be trusted by his family, and they just have to go on without him, which isn't the most difficult of things. Although it is very sad because he gave up his birthright, being part of the royal family and serving his country. He effectively gave up his country because he left it and he said nasty things about it. And he gave up the dignity that he had, really, to be Meghan Markle's husband. And I think at some point, obviously, she's going to leave him. So it's really, it's really terrible. And I do wonder, this is beyond anything to do with King Charles or the royals, just on a human level. I do wonder why he chose to get himself into this situation with this woman, because it's so clearly a losing proposition for him. It's just not smart, even though he obviously despised his family and wanted to find ways to publicly humiliate them. And this has been going on for a long time. You would think he could have done it in a way that was more advantageous to himself, but this goes back to short-term versus long-term thinking. Obviously, he's a short-term thinker, and he's attracted to someone else who is Markle, and now they're in all these into all of these issues, such as not, being able to keep the contracts with Netflix and Spotify going. So it's really something else, but I will say that I don't think that marriage is going to last, and that's nothing to do with royalty or whatever. It just has to do with two very unfortunate people getting together, and one of those people, Markle, being a bit more cunning and cutthroat than the other, and it's not difficult to see what's likely to happen under those circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I think they're going to end up getting a divorce, and I think that I look at it as kind of like a sad thing. I think Meghan Markle is a fascinating study in narcissistic personality disorder, and I think that Harry got entangled with her, and he is. Probably not the brightest crayon in the box. And I think that he was very easily manipulated. And then all of a sudden they had two kids. And it's like, I mean, he's in a really difficult situation. And what I hope happens is that they do get divorced and that Harry, goes back to England with his tail between his legs. And I think that if he did that and he got rid of Meghan Markle, like I can't imagine a universe in which his father wouldn't try to be gracious to, like, slowly over time, not right away, but like over time, welcome him back into the family, and hopefully they would be able to rebuild that trust if she was no longer in the picture. But I just think it's a really difficult situation for all of them to be in. I mean, I know a lot of people wanted Charles to strip their titles, which I don't think actually would result in any positivity towards the whole situation. I just think it is what it is. But it is interesting to watch it play out in the public square, and I think it is a fascinating insight into the psychology of the whole situation.
And there is a strong argument to be made that Charles should strip them of their titles, not because his feelings are hurt, but because they've acted in a way which brings dishonor to the monarchy. And they've also isolated themselves from not only from the monarchy, but from the United Kingdom. So if there's a reigning royal family, why are you keeping your titles and trying to use them for commercial benefit in another country? It's definitely smart. As you said, it's another perspective of when you were talking about that the title should not be stripped because in the end it really wouldn't do anything for the royal family. And that's the point of view they've chosen to adopt, and it makes good sense. Although you can clearly understand why it would also make sense to strip them of their titles because they're basically abusing them. But I think that what one can see with Harry and Meghan is that people can throw away something that over the long run would have been very good for them in favor of perceived short-term benefits, and at the end of the day wind up pretty unpopular as they have, and the unpopularity is simply the prelude to winding up with nothing. Although I don't think Markle will ever quite wind up with nothing, because I think she will always graft herself onto some person or organization or whatever, and enrich herself accordingly. Harry, on the other hand, I don't think he has that luxury, and I think that he very well could wind up with nothing. In which case, he would go, as you mentioned, crawling back to his family with his tail between his legs. Although I don't know if they'd ever be able to trust him after what he's done, even if they, I'm sure, would, on the basis of mercy, accept him back into the fold. I think there would always be an issue that his family would have trusting him and the government would have trusting him.
God, what a situation. Well, I really appreciate the work you're doing in the book that you wrote, and I'm definitely going to get a copy of it. I think it's just like just a really fascinating topic. I do want to switch gears because there's so much going on in the country right now that we just have to touch base on a couple of things. So, first off, I want to get your reaction to some of the recent Supreme Court decisions around affirmative action, around the whole like making the website for the gay wedding, et cetera, et cetera. How have you felt about this term of the Supreme Court?
It's better than the last one. The last one obviously was when Roe v. Wade was struck down. But I'm not surprised by what took place with affirmative action with the web designer who was asked to create a website for a same-sex couple, and I'm also not surprised by what happened with holy Moses, affirmative action. It's trying to get everything together in my mind.
Student loans,
Yeah,
affirmative
student loans.
action.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. And there was more actually. I was actually getting to just all the stuff just running together. But starting off with student loans, I think it was great that that it was made that it was made clear Biden's policies cannot be enforced. The forgiveness of $10,000 worth of loans. Of course, it's a bit more complicated than that, but that was the crux of it. It would have caused inflation, needless to mention, because the government would need to print money to make up for the shortfall of revenue that it had anticipated coming in as a result of loan repayment. All student loans, you know this very well, I'm sure, but a lot of people don't. Student loans today are not taken out in the public sector. They have been for some time. Available exclusively to those who go to Uncle Sam for these loans. So this is completely a matter of the federal government. And if the federal government were to quote unquote cancel $10,000 worth of student debt, it would still need the money that it anticipated from the loan repayment. So it'd have to print dollars that would cause more inflation. It was already in the process of causing inflation, but would grow much more severe as time passed. And we think about all the people who have loans outstanding, $10,000 a pop goes a long way pretty rapidly. So it's good. Also, it would have been something very unfortunate if people came to expect that they no longer were obligated to pay back an obligation of some kind that they were contractually obligated to. It would have built the expectation that they could get out of anything, and the contracts would have wound up meaning nothing, and that would have caused total disruption in the business world and in society. It would have created this expectation that nothing really means anything, and I could do whatever I want. And you just can't have a functional first world society that goes on that basis. So looking at affirmative action, I thought it was a wonderful decision. Affirmative action, in my opinion, even though I understand why it started, it was never a good idea, but it was something that certainly outlived its period of intended usefulness. Even Sandra Day O'Connor said back in 2003, when the Supreme Court did uphold race-based college admissions, that this was something which she hoped to be phased out within the next 25 years, and it wound up being phased out within the next 20 years. So affirmative action was something very nasty. It was a form of discrimination. It was people being told that no matter how good you are, you're not good enough because of your racial background. Not even the color of your skin, really. It's about racial background, and something like that at institutions that are either public or publicly funded is absolutely crazy. The government was sanctioning discrimination. It was telling people who really deserved an award for their merit that they were close to worthless. And it's great to see this absolutely excremental situation go the way of the dinosaurs. And then, of course, you have the issue with discrimination in terms of business services. I do think that the case was decided correctly. I do favor freedom of association, and that comes even when It is under unpopular circumstances. And I think that if this web designer did not want to do the website for the same sex couple, it was her right to do that. Is it smart business? No. If I were, a business consultant for her, she said, I want to do this, I would have told her, don't do it. It's just not good for you in the long run. It's going to give you bad publicity as well. But, if she wants to do that, she should have the right to do that. And I think the case was decided correctly in her favor. And it's good to see that freedom of association still means something, because obviously there's so much legislation out there at the state, federal, even local level, which basically makes it so freedom of association does not exist in any meaningful sense. I find that to be highly regrettable. That's just part of individual autonomy to me. People choose who they want to associate with in a host of ways. But it's good to see freedom of association get a boost, even if it comes under circumstances that I find to be less than desirable. Like I said, from a business perspective, I would never encourage anyone to turn down clientele on the basis of sexual orientation. But it's I think it should be her right to determine how she wants to handle her business. And it's good that she scored a victory for freedom of association, even if her pursuing her beliefs here winds up in her business losing money or maybe even going under. It's her choice, and that should be respected.
I mean, it's one of those things too. It's like with like the wedding cake stuff or even the website stuff. Why do you want someone to bake a cake for you or build a website that really does not want
That's a good
to do it?
question.
I mean, it's just like it's just like all a political stunt for me. And so I do agree with you that it's kind of one of those things where if someone came to me and I ran a website business and maybe like, and I don't care about gay marriage at all, so it wouldn't be an issue for me. But like maybe if I did have those considerations, I might be like, you know what, path of least resistance is to just build the website. I'm not going to make a big public stink about this because this is something that could really reflect badly on me. But I also, just as a consumer, I wouldn't want the government to force someone to make something for me. Like, just go somewhere else. It doesn't make sense. And I think that, if anything, I hope rulings like that will teach people that, you know, you are not entitled to service from other
Absolutely.
people. Like, you're just not. Like, go somewhere else. There are a million website designers out there. Everyone will survive. In regards to like affirmative action and student loans, it's one of those things where like I'm gonna be honest. In regards to the student loan stuff, like I'm of two minds about it. On one hand, I think that intellectually it was decided probably completely correctly. On the other hand, I'm like, everyone else is getting socialism. I want my little bit of socialism too. And so, but that's purely a selfish
Uh,
consideration. But like with those two decisions, it's almost like I wonder if they long term will actually mean anything, because it does seem as though the Biden administration and Harvard are already looking for ways to get around these decisions and to find loopholes. Like Project Veritas got a whistleblower that they released as soon as the decision came out that basically said that the Biden administration already has a backup plan B where they're just going to reduce the minimum payment to zero for people making like $80,000 a year or something like that. So they're trying to get around it. And then Harvard basically released a statement saying the Supreme Court said you could still write about race in your essays. And so maybe you want to just write about race in your essays and tell us what race you are in your essays. And that's going to be their way of getting around it. So, do you think that there's going to be long term impact from these decisions?
I think that there will be. I think it's going to cause more legal battles. I think that will be the
Mhm.
long term impact. It'll be good for lawyers because the Biden administration certainly is going to try to find some way around the ruling with regard to student loans. Apparently, there's no real way they can. I've been reading legal analysis of the situation, but they're going to try it regardless. It's
Oh,
politics,
yeah.
and there are going to be lawsuits over it, and it's going to be the next, just another rigmarole. Then when it comes to something like the affirmative action matter, the Biden administration and various institutions of quote unquote higher learning will try to find some way around the ruling by taking into account certain things that are a proxy for race, such as people who live in certain neighborhoods, this, that, the other thing. And we'll see how that goes. It might be that this case comes back to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court finds that they were violating the spirit of the law, if not the letter, and therefore there'd be another ruling saying they couldn't violate the spirit of the law. Like I said, this is going to be very good for lawyers, but I do think there's no question that the Biden administration we'll try to find a way around both the affirmative action and the student loan rulings. And it will be interesting to see how this functions politically, because affirmative action was not terribly popular, and student loan forgiveness is unpopular among those who would not have their loans forgiven. So we're not dealing with broad policies that have broad-based popularity here in either case. So the political considerations here for the Biden administration, I think, are clear. They're trying to gin up a certain portion of the Democratic base to turn out for 2024.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
that's the long and the short of it. But if they are looking at the broader electorate, which they would at least need some support from, particularly in key swing states, what they're doing is not good. So they're really trying to achieve some sort of balance here, I think. But it's impossible to do because you have they're trying to serve two masters that have conflicting demands. You have in one of the relatively few swing voters left who doesn't want to have inflation to pay for, to effectively pay for the student loans of others. And then you have the same person who doesn't like race based policies for college admission or employment. And then you have the Democratic base that says, yes, we want to all be about race and we want free this and free that. So you really can't please both of these audiences simultaneously. And what the Biden administration does is anyone's guess. I can say for certain, whatever its decision might be, it will not be Joe Biden's to make. Someone will make it in his name. But what they do will be something else.
Well, I mean, and on that note, let's talk a little bit about the election, because of course we have a nice clown car of candidates over on the Republican side,
Uh,
and whoever thought that like Mike Pence or Chris Christie were good positive investments to make in terms of like what an epic waste of like perfectly good money
uh,
to fund their candidacy. I
oh,
don't
yeah.
know, but what are some of your kind of like initial impressions about how the race is shaping up for 2024?
Well, it's obviously Trump's to lose in terms of the Republican nomination. He's running away with it, and I'm not surprised by that at all. I always figured that would happen. Uh, DeSantis got in the race ill-advisedly, principally because of his wife's ambitions, and you
Oh,
have
that's
other.
interesting. I didn't know it was his wife's ambitions.
Oh yeah, she's very much in control of basically everything that he does, personally and professionally. It's a crazy situation. From a psychological perspective, you could probably do a whole episode analyzing their relationship. But then you have Chris Christie, who's there, I think, purely to raise his profile and to spite Trump. He's running for Joe Walsh's position from 2020, essentially, as is
Mm.
Asa Hutchinson, who's really not worth mentioning. Christie
Oh,
is.
I totally forgot he was even in the race. Asa.
It's easy to.
Yes.
It's easy to. I mean, you have a real, like you said, a clown car. So it's something to see how all these people are functioning. Mike Pence uh, has a more moderate tone than Trump, but he's much more radical actually on many issues, particularly social ones. And it seems like he's there basically to take evangelical support from Trump, even though it's not
Yep.
working.
So, I mean, so what do you think about my favorite candidate, and probably the only candidate that I would actually vote for on the Republican side right now anyway, is Vivek Ramaswamy. I love Vivek. I think that, I mean, like, he's not going to get the nomination, and I think we can both acknowledge that. But I think he's just doing a really amazing job in terms of messaging, in terms of showing up and being a leader, in terms of he's going on all of these kind of like opposition media shows to like plead his case, and he's doing it very, very well. What do you think about him?
I have a very high opinion of Vivek. He's one of the most impressive candidates that the GOP has had in quite some time. And I think he's a real asset to the party. And I'm sure we will see him have much more of a high profile as the years pass. He's quite young by the standards of politicians, very young, in fact. So I'm not at all. I'm not at all downcast about his prospects, even though he's clearly not going to win this round. But I think he's also running for an appointment within a Trump administration.
Hmm.
That could be what he's really running for. And there's no reason why he should not receive it. I mean, it would be crazy for Trump not to appoint him to something if Trump beats Biden, which is actually quite possible. Trump's chances of defeating Biden are better than I thought they would be. That's for sure. People are that dissatisfied with how things are going in the country. So if Trump wins, Vivek would be an outstanding guy to have around, and Trump would be crazy not to utilize Vivek's many talents. Very, very impressive guy.
Do you think that Vivek has any shot at the VP slot?
I think that Trump's going to need to pick a woman. If
I
not,
would tend to agree. Yeah.
yeah, if not for that, I think he would be probably at the top of the list. But I just don't think Trump can make an all male ticket work anymore, or any Republican could. I mean, that it's not a good thing. I don't like checking boxes or another form of affirmative action, but you do have to be practical in this environment, particularly after Roe v. Wade. There is the need to appeal to female voters, and an all male ticket is not going to get the job done in all likelihood. That's not to say women aren't going to vote for a male candidate, but it's nice to have someone on the ticket who can very well relate to female voters, something that the GOP has had serious issues with, to say the least. And I think that the best candidates for that would be Tulsi Gabbard or Nancy Mace. I think
Mm.
that either would be a very good balance for Trump. And it would be interesting to see how either would do on his ticket. I think they would bring a lot to the table.
Tulsi Gabbard is an interesting choice, and I'm kind of like I'm kind of wondering what she's even doing now because she was supposed to come to an event in New Hampshire a couple weeks ago, Pork Fest, and she was supposed to speak at it, and she backed out at the last minute. There were Vivek came to Pork Fest, RFK came to Pork Fest. I want to ask you about him in a second. Larry Elder showed up, so we really did have like high profile people at this event, and she kind of like backed out at the last minute. And I've been curious about what Tulsi is actually trying to accomplish. Is she trying to get like a commentator position, like a pundit position? Is she trying to have her own show? But I think this idea of her being Trump's VP candidate is interesting. She obviously did a round of endorsements of Republican candidates for the midterms. What do you think her chances are of that?
I think that she's definitely on Trump's mind. I don't at the present. I don't know exactly what she's doing. I know that she's still a public figure, obviously, and making the rounds. But what her immediate goals are, I don't know. But over
Mm.
the longer term, well, I mean, it's not that long, talking about next year. Could she try to get a spot on Trump's ticket? I think for sure. And Trump would be crazy not to seriously consider having her on the ticket. He'd also be seriously crazy not to consider having Mace on the ticket. So I think that Gabbard is definitely there. She's definitely available for a potential vice presidential run. And the question is, does she want to do that in 2024 or later? Because by political standards, she's really not that old, and she would certainly have more opportunity. But it could be that 2024 is her time. Same thing for Mace. So it's interesting, but I do think that Trump will go with a female vice presidential pick. I just don't know who. I think Carrie Lake would be a terrible idea, but
Yeah.
I don't think he's really considering her for that either. I'm not sure she even wants that. She does seem to be prospering as as a pundit who's still contesting the 2020 election in Arizona. The case is still cycling through the court, so more power to her. I'm glad to see her doing that. But the idea that she would be a good vice presidential pick for Trump, I think, is fairly outlandish.
Yeah, I kind of thought that she might be like earlier on, but I've thought about it more and she's way too divisive and she's way too easy to attack. I don't think that she's going to be appealing to people who are not already going to vote for Trump anyway. And Tulsi Gabbard I think is much more appealing in that respect. But, speaking of people who are crossing the aisle though, I do want to talk to you about RFK because, I think the Supreme Court decisions were very revealing about RFK and what he believes because prior to this round of Supreme Court decisions, almost everyone I knew in my circle was full RFK. They totally supported him, and I wasn't really, I knew that he spoke out against the COVID vaccine and all of this stuff, and I of course I like that. I thought that was positive, but I really didn't know that much about him up until I saw him speak at Porkfest a couple weeks ago, and it was very striking to me that he seemed to stick to kind of like this, like he was focusing entirely on the vaccines and COVID, which I guess, that's kind of like his calling card. But at the same time, you're running for president. You need to be able to speak to all issues. And so when we got into the Q&A round, he said something to the effect of they were talking about like would you ban like, guns or whatever, and he basically said, "No, I'm not coming for your guns, but we need to do something about school shootings." And then he said, "The Second Amendment hasn't really been under attack in the last couple of years." And if you listen to the recording of that speech, you can actually hear me audibly shouting, "What?" Because I was so shocked that that came. I was like, did I just hear that? He's saying the Second Amendment hasn't been under attack? Like, what is going on? And that was my first. I was like, this guy is not everything that people are saying he is. And then with the Supreme Court decision, he basically came out in favor of affirmative action. He seemed to be very positive towards the whole student loan thing. And it was like one of those wake up calls where it's like, oh, okay, you're still a Democrat. Like, don't, we shouldn't be fooled just because you were good on one issue, you're still a Democrat. So what do you think about him?
I've never been on the RFK train or anything close to it. I've had some kind remarks for him when he criticizes certain elements of the political system that I think need to be criticized. But a lot of Republicans certainly were amplifying him beyond his beyond what he actually is. I mean, the guy is doing surprisingly well against Biden, but he's not going to win, even though he could give Biden a real run for his money, which would be funny to watch. But the truth of the matter is that RFK's views on a great many things are highly disagreeable, and the affirmative action thing, especially, and the student debt thing, it goes to show where he's coming from. And I don't begrudge him his views. He has a right to them, as anyone has a right to his or her views. But a lot of Republicans definitely believed that he was more in league with them than he actually is. And it's easy to see why he is so big on like COVID and a few other things. Because he doesn't want to focus on other issues that could cost him support potentially from crossover voters. So it's something. But I mean, remember, you can't expect all too much from a member of the Kennedy family who's a California environmental lawyer. I mean, it's pretty clear where he's coming from. But it's fine if he believes what he believes. It's just that people should not misrepresent his belief system, and I think a lot of Republicans were doing that. They're so hung up still on COVID, and it made them blind, however temporarily, to what RFK's broader perspective is. And I think that RFK basically is a throwback to the Democratic Party as it existed in the 70s and 80s. And that's, certainly better than what the Democratic Party is today. So I'm not angry about it at all. I'm not here to bash RFK's views, however much I might disagree with quite a few of them. But he is a better alternative than Biden, no question of that. But at the same time, people were sort of making him out to be a sort of conservative Democrat, like some guy from the South might have been in the 1960s or maybe even earlier than that, definitely even earlier than that, to the 80s, when this was really still a thing. Before the Reagan Revolution really upended this old arrangement. But RFK is just a formerly mainstream liberal, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not what a lot of Republicans thought they were getting from him. So I wasn't disheartened to hear what he had to say about these rulings. I wasn't surprised. To me, it was just, par of the course. And hopefully this episode will lead a lot of Republicans to more carefully consider who they support, and it will lead them not to become enamored of a candidate on the basis of his or her stance on a single issue, no matter how important that issue might be to them.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I think he'd be a better candidate than Biden would, but at the same time, he is still a Democrat at the end of the day, and I think that people need to acknowledge that just because you like someone on some things doesn't mean that he's still the appropriate choice. Now, what I do like about RFK is he is really pissing off the Democratic establishment.
I
So,
love it.
oh, it's so great. Did you see that? So when he came, so New Hampshire is going to be so much fun to watch in regards to the primary, because the Democrats have basically taken the first in the nation status away from New Hampshire. They get into like South Carolina or something. However, New Hampshire state law says we will be the first in the nation primary, and there ain't really anything you can do about it, because whatever primary date you set, we're just going to set the date before that, and that's the way it's going to be. So now the DNC has told the candidates, you are not allowed to campaign in New Hampshire. You can't even be on the ballot in New Hampshire. So Joe Biden is quite literally not going to be on the ballot in New Hampshire. But RFK seems to be giving them all the middle finger. And when he agreed to come speak at PorcFest, the New Hampshire Democrats issued this dramatic letter denouncing him for, cavorting with the libertarian extremists. And then he said a rebuttal back against that. It was great. So he is making a lot of people angry. And I think that that's good in and of itself.
Absolutely, yes. It's good to see him standing up to this, even though I think, is doing it for his own reasons. But the reason that the New Hampshire primary was demoted effectively by the Democrats is because of race. They felt the New Hampshire electorate was quote unquote too white, and that they needed a quote unquote diverse electorate for the sake of quote unquote equity. And of course, diverse here is just another way of saying black, because the South Carolina primary is dominated by black voters. It's not even like you're having a multiracial electorate where you have something close to parity between the races and you want to get a good representation of diversity. It's totally about amplifying basically the BLM crowd, which is ironic considering what's become of BLM. But it's sad to see. It's very sad to see. This in itself is actually a form of discrimination, because now the Democrats of New Hampshire are disenfranchised effectively. It's what their party chose. I don't feel sorry for them, but it's a sorry situation. So it's good to see RFK giving the middle finger to this situation, even though I think it's for his own purposes, as I mentioned. But it's looking beyond him or beyond even the 2024 election. It's really terrible that the Democrats would do this to their own voters on the basis of race.
Yeah.
And it goes to show how serious racial discrimination can be in the name of quote unquote equity.
It's really funny because there's a state legislator. I mean, there were many of the Republicans were messing around with this, but the state legislator who introduced the anti-CRT bill in New Hampshire 2 years ago, his name is Keith Ammon. He was completely instigating the Democrats to move the primary. He kept tweeting, "New Hampshire's way too white for this primary, Democrats," because they of course want the DNC to piss off all the Democrats in New Hampshire so they can create a little war going back and forth. There's actually a group of New Hampshire Democrats who wrote a letter begging Joe Biden not to run for president again. I just think it's so entertaining to me. I think it's great. So Joseph, what do you think we're in for in terms of just the 2024 election? Maybe some high level thoughts. If you had to make a prediction today, how do you think it's going to go?
I think that 2024 is a real coin toss. I could not say that Biden is in any good position. I can't say that Trump is in any good position, because it's going to be Trump or Biden unless the Democrats choose to remove Biden from the ticket at the last minute, which could well happen. It would be something done inside the party, not as the result of the primary process. But it would be him being pressured to step down, to refuse the nomination. That might sound far-fetched, but if he's unpopular enough, I could definitely see that coming to pass. So that's, very much wait and see. But I think that if Biden is the nominee and he runs against Trump, it's a coin toss election. Trump has proved far more resilient than even I thought he would be, and I never abandoned him. He has proven to be someone who is able to remain relevant and in some cases even grow his popularity despite unimaginable adversity. So it's interesting, this election cycle, because you have two unpopular guys, but one of whom is just tremendously resilient. The other one is very tired, and there's a serious question as to whether or not his party even will keep him on the ticket. So it's something else. It is something else. If it is Biden versus Trump, coin toss. If it's Newsom versus Trump, which there's some talk that Newsom would be the candidate the Democrats replace Biden with, then Newsom I think would be favored. I don't know how much. I certainly would not want him as president, but he does certainly have more energy and appeal, particularly to female voters, than Biden does. So we'll see. But I don't think that if it's Trump versus Biden, either candidate is favored. All things being equal, Trump should definitely be favored. But there's just such a high floor which the Democrats have in this country that it's hard for the Republican to win even under the best of circumstances. But these are uniquely bad circumstances for the Democrats, so we'll see what happens.
Well, it's going to be interesting to watch, and I definitely will welcome you back on the channel anytime as we go down this path to 2024. I definitely want your opinions and your updates. Thank you so much for joining me. Is there anything you want to plug and make sure people are aware of before we wrap up?
Well, thank you very much for having me on. It's a great honor as always. And of course, you're welcome on my show. I hope we can set that
Yes,
up. Excellent.
absolutely.
We could talk about something related to business and economics. There's no shortage of stuff. Anyway, I want to thank everyone for having tuned in, and I thank you for having spent your time listening to me talk about A, B, or C. If you want to check out the book, it's a good idea too. Even if you're not running a business, I think you might find it to be interesting. All the same, it is on Amazon. Carlin was kind enough to bring up the page before, and I'm greatly appreciative for that. And I will just say that it's good that people tune into her show and other shows, and of course my show. It's nice to see an alternative media ecosystem rising up in relation to the unfortunate situation that we've all been presented with for so long. So I do want to thank people for watching these online shows that are an alternative to CNN, CBS, ABC, whatever. Who knows how long CNN will be around for? That would be an
Right.
interesting
Yeah.
topic of discussion. But it's great to see people watching something other than whatever they're thrown on television. And more people are doing that. So there are more and more people to thank.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. And guys, the book is pinned. The link up to the Amazon link is pinned to the top of the chat on YouTube, and you can pick it up on Amazon. Follow the Leader: What the Business World Can Learn from How Queen Elizabeth Managed and Served Others. I think it's just such a great topic. And of course, Joseph is also always such a great guest. So thank you again for coming on the channel. I'm just going to remove you from the screen for a moment, talk about one quick thing, and then we'll wrap up. So guys, please mount that like button for Joseph, and please make sure you follow him on all his platforms, and he'll be back again sometime soon. But for today, we are going to wrap up, and I just want to remind everyone, please make sure you do subscribe to the Substack. I'm writing articles in my head that I'm going to post later today, including why Planned Parenthood said that virginity is a social construct. Why don't we just disrupt every element of society? That's going to be just great. That's going to go up on the Substack later today. And of course, I do have my supporter call starting at 7 p.m. Eastern time. If you are a paying member of my Substack or of my locals or of my Patreon, you will be invited to a private unrecorded Zoom call. Now, if you are on my Substack for $5 a month, $50 a year, what I want you to do is head over to this email that's pinned right to the middle of the page right now, called the Unwoke Roundup. Scroll down to the bottom, and that is when you will have your Zoom links. The supporter call will be starting at 7 p.m. Eastern time, and it'll go, however long it goes. Sometimes Marathon Monday calls go a long time, but I will look forward to seeing you guys there. That's all we have for this time. Thank you for joining us. And take care, guys. We'll see you soon.